Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're ready to start. There will be some people who will be joining us a little bit later. Today is the 8th of August, as you know, but tomorrow is National Women's Day. And I think for us, the one thing that we try every year is to highlight that while we have National Women's Day, I think that there are still many obstacles, many struggles that are specific to us as women that need to be dealt with. I think we're not saying like have a happy Women's Day and give someone flowers, because there's much more fundamental issues that we need to deal with in terms of inequality and injustice that continues to be part of our society. And that is why we thought that for today's webinar, we wanted to look specifically at women, water, and activism. So that's, and the people we've invited have a different experience. We have, I'm gonna, today's session is going to be dealt quite differently, where I'm going to introduce all our speakers at once. We're then going to try and work so that there's a kind of a coffee shop discussion. So with us, we have Ms. Makoma Lekalakala. She's the present director of Earthlife Africa, and she's an activist environmental, Earthlife Africa is an activist environmental justice organization. She has been active in social movements, tackling issues from gender and women's rights issues, economic and environmental justice issues. She has focused in targeting environmental corruption, which is important. Her commitment to climate justice in South Africa has led civil society to win the first South African climate change legal case against the government and the reversal of the nuclear deal by South Africa and the Russian government, for which she received the Goldman Environmental Prize for Africa in 2018. Now that prize is like the Nobel Prize for Environmental Activism. She has also won the SAB Environmentalist of the Year Award in 2018, amongst other awards that she's won. I know Makoma for many years, and it's been a very good, it's always wonderful to be able to fight side by side with Makoma. She's a very strong campaigner, strong fighter, and always looking for a just and fair society. She presently is a commissioner on the Presidential Climate Commission and making some waves on that front as well. Welcome, Makoma, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. Our next speaker is Tracy-Lynn Fields, or I should say Professor Tracy-Lynn Fields. She has about 20 years research and teaching experience in the fields of environmental justice and the misuse of Earth's endowment for present and future generations. She has published in national and international peer-reviewed academic journals, as well as the popular media, and has successfully supervised more than 30 master's, LLM, and PhD students. Her current and past research and consulting engagements have involved work for the South African Human Rights Commission, File Foundation, and the Water Research Commission. She also holds the chair, the Claude Leon Chair in Earth Justice, and she is a professor of law at Wits University. Finally, but not least, is Ms. Tsholofelo Sepotokele. She is the Environmental Justice Education Manager at groundWork. She's doing an amazing work with the activist school that they run. The EJE campaign is instrumental in the planning and the facilitation of the Environmental Justice School for Activists, which aims to nurture a cohort of knowledgeable and skilled environmental justice community activists, and bringing in the youth, which is what we need, that mobilize against environmental injustices and foster restorative practices towards a just transition. So a very diverse group of speakers, panelists, but also a wealth of information and experience. So I think that we can have a really good discussion. There could be good questions as we move forward. Okay, I hope other people don't have the same problem and that you can join Welcome to all the people who are joining online. I can see that you've been introducing yourself. That's great. Please feel free to add questions, add comments as we chat and as we move along. The format for today is I have a set of 7 questions, and I will be asking these questions some of them would be to everyone, 1 or 2 may be specific, and each time the respondents have, the panelists have about 2 to 3 minutes to respond. And we will try to keep this discussion going so that if you do have questions and we get to the end of our 7, we can then start raising your questions as well. I hope it's going to be a fun, informative webinar. Let's begin with the basic question, which gets everyone rolling, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I want each of you, I'm going to start with Makoma, and then Tracy-Lynn, and then Tsholofelo, to basically, in your view and in the area of work that you are focusing on, what are the key water and environmental challenges that we are facing right now? And not only in South Africa, but the world. Makoma.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ferrial, and thank you for initiating this discussion. As we know that water is linked to climate change, and so this impacts on everyone globally. And we know that globally there is an issue around access or lack to access to clean drinking water. And this is one of the major issues that I feel that it's a threat to life. And we know that when there's lack to access to safe, clean drinking water, this affects more women and girls, because in some societies, you have to put yourself last as a woman, whether you dish food, whether for any sort of service or whatever you have to do in the family. And this has also increased the vulnerability of women. In other communities, we know that it's also, you have to go and fetch water somewhere. But the threat that we're facing now, it's climate change-induced natural disasters that are water-related. And we know what happened in Durban last year, around the coast in Mozambique and Malawi, and this has increased water-related hazards. And the rising temperatures also have eroded, our water security. And this is what I feel that this is the threat that is facing us currently. And the other thing that we also experience is that we find most of our waters being polluted. And the waters being polluted, there's also the mismanagement of water treatment facilities that we have. Either there is no implementation or lack of putting that as a very important aspect, that the water treatment, so that people can be able to access water, should be clean and treated water. And we find this as an everyday challenge, particularly in the mining towns, in the mining areas. And the lack of access to water, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals number 6, which our government has signed onto or has ratified onto. We feel that the rights of ordinary people are being violated. And it's not only that the Sustainable Development Goals are not reached, but also that the fundamental right to access sufficient water as set out in our constitution, it's not being realized also. Thank you.
Thank you, Makoma. I think that you've covered quite a bit of, climate change is going to be the biggest challenge that's going to affecting a lot of what we do. In fact, UNICEF has said that climate change is going to be first felt through our water and through water resources. And I think you're right. Tracy-Lynn, may I hand over to you?
Thanks, Ferrial. So for me, it's quite difficult to bound an issue as an environmental issue, because the way I think of the challenges that we're facing, and my contribution is going to perhaps deepen Makoma's comments on climate change and water and pollution, etc., is that it's a problem, it's a technical problem, It's a problem of behaviors and systems and mindsets. And we're in this kind of transition phase where there's so much that's changing. There's so much changing around our natural world. There's so much changing in our social world. And it's a very chaotic space. And so in that space, you have the emergence of mindsets that are helpful or a hindrance. And some of those mindsets, for example, are around the kind of mindsets that set in where you have a survivalist ethic. And it's kind of, what can I do for myself? So if you put it in the water context, if you take something like the Verlorenvlei on the Western Cape Coast, which is a pet project of mine, one of our most important Ramsar-listed inland lakes, which has basically not reached the sea for the last decade because of water grabbing by the agriculturalists in the area. And now there's also a proposal for mining. So a survivalist ethic, a kind of a real pervasive lack of appreciation for the rules that are necessary for the common good. And you see that in so many aspects of our life in South Africa. You can see it now in the taxi wars that are happening in Cape Town. Appreciation that we've got to actually respect some rules if we're going to protect the common good. And that's very important in the environmental context. And then a lack of empathy and the way that we engage with each other. So we have to try and understand each other's position. So those are just sort of my 3 brief comments on mindset and environmental issues. But if I have to highlight one particular environmental issue for water, I would say that it is having the most dangerous toilet in the world, which is the flush toilet. And how we are, and I've done some work on interdisciplinary work on sanitation, how we are not separating our black water from our grey water. And we are, there's a lovely phrase, dilution of the pollution is not a solution. We are diluting these waste streams which have resource elements in them. And this is creating a massive problem. Our dysfunctional wastewater treatment plants, it's going to require a socio-technical, socio-cultural transition, which can be very exciting. But our past is also, it makes it difficult for us to make that transition. So I would flag that as a significant water problem.
Thank you, Tracy. And I think you've raised such important issues, and the combination of what Makoma has said, and then you in terms of the technical. And yes, I have been having this discussion and people talking about having the waterless toilets and how do we roll that out so it doesn't become what has happened with the solar water heater geysers that we saw that was only be placed on poor communities and not across the country, which now I think people are changing. But I like that dangerous toilet in the world, and dilution of the pollution is not a solution. My goodness, that could be a slogan we have to just take from you and use it as we move along. Tsholofelo, over to you.
Right. Thanks, Ferrial. So I am going to echo what Makoma and Tracy has said. So within our environmental justice school, from our participants, as well as the organizations that groundWork works with, we would say that the main challenges are the degradation of land, of water, of air, as well as people's health, which is brought by false solutions to waste management. So us having landfill sites where we dump all our waste, all our plastic, and all the toxins seep into the soil, which we then use for our own food. And those toxins not only stay in the soil, but also seep into our water table, which then comes into our streams, our water sources. And we would say also pollution by the extractive industry. As Makoma has said, there are some people who have no access to clean drinking water, but our industries have access to mine, to do commercial agriculture. And also recently in our last EJ school, the 2023 cohort, there is an issue with invasive alien vegetation in communities that then take valuable water that could have been used for our own plants as well as people's livelihoods. So yeah, those are the main ones.
Thank you, Tsholofelo. That's great. I like the link to waste because I think Tracy also said this, is that we cannot look at what we're dealing with as an environmental issue, that it has to be broader. And it's not just about waste in a separate, silo, and water separate, and air pollution. And actually it's all linked, and it's linked to health. It's linked to schooling. So I think that we need to stop that boxing of environmental challenges, so to speak. So thank you for, I think, bringing that out, and for making us remember that it's more than just, environment. I think the next one, I think, is, we're living in a world that sometimes, I was speaking to someone the other day, where we read the news and it's one negative story after another. And in the water sector, it can be so overwhelming, in terms of one bad thing after another. And you think, can we really fix what's going on in the country? I'd like to pose this question to Makoma and Tsholofelo, but Tracy-Lynn, if you want to jump in as well, please just raise your hand. It's not, it's like I said, it's like a coffee shop discussion, just jump in. Could you share a specific success story or an inspiring story where women-led activism has made a significant difference in your area of expertise? And Makoma, I know you're not going to speak about yourself, but I'm going to say you are one of those inspiring women that has led activism. But I really do want to ask for other stories that you both have. Tsholofelo and Makoma, please.
Thank you very much, Ferrial. When we talk about success stories, I think people would remember the court case by a class action suit by residents of Soweto Piri. And in this class action suit, it was led by 5 people, and 4 of them were women: Lindiwe Mazibugu, Grace Munyai, Jennifer Mugatsani, and I think Sophia, but I've just forgotten the last name. So this was so inspiring, because this was women from a particular township that were challenging the water tariffs and the installation of prepaid water meters, because they saw that as a kind of violation of their right to access to water. And then they also were questioning the free basic allocation of water of 6 kiloliters per household. And for me, this is a success story, because they were able to inspire a lot of people to say to people, we have the right to this. And also that the socio-economic issues within the townships should be considered when some of these policies are made. Imagine a 6 kiloliter of water per month for a family of about 15, which you may have one person employed, and even none of the other people in the house can be able to access what we would call umdende, your social grants by then. And so this was inspiring, because they really changed our perception. They really challenged the unfair tariffs that they thought that the Johannesburg municipality was imposing on them, and the cutting off of water, that in a way they were saying the city is responsible for much of the illnesses that are taking place. And unfortunately, Mazibugo died within a month before the case was concluded. And I know that Jennifer also died at a later stage. But this was a success story for me, and an inspiring story, and a story that says you have to go to the extremes to fight for your rights. And they did it. And unfortunately, nothing has changed. But that was a success story for me, that ordinary women would be able to take up the issue of access to basic services. Thanks.
Thank you, Makoma. I think you've raised a really good point, and I want to actually park one question for Tracy-Lynn in terms of using courts to fight for climate justice or environmental justice, because that seems to be the way that we're going. So just park that question, but I want Tsholofelo to answer this one here in terms of an inspiring story or incident that she can talk about.
All right, thanks, Ferrial. So we have about 8 past EJS cohorts. And this is a woman who came from a mining affected area. And as we know, women endure the most environmental injustices because of their socially bestowed domestic responsibilities. So she went on to start her own organization within her community, and she was instrumental in the recent deadly air case, where the court ruled that poor air quality was being violated by industries within their communities, and that it was infringing upon the right to a healthy environment, and that the government needs to take immediate action against this, that it was the government's duty to ensure that people have good air quality. So I've found out to be a very inspiring story. Someone coming from the community, from the ground, and challenging power, speaking back to power through the courts, using Section 24 in order for them to realize and to resist rather against these injustices within their communities. Although the case is now back in court, but I still see it as a success.
Thanks, Tsholofelo. I'd like to hand over to Tracy, because I think the question of fighting environmental justice issues or climate justice issues, or many of these challenges, water, soil, waste, air pollution in courts, like, is that the only way we can actually make any change? Because a lot of people want to jump to that, let's go to court kind of thing, let's lay the charges. Tracy-Lynn, what is your view on that?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I would actually first just like to highlight 4 extraordinary women that I've come across that are inspiring and then are not necessarily linked to court cases. So the first one is a lady I met at the Human Rights Commission's conference last year. Her name is Pramila Dionith, and she started the Merebank Community Foundation, and I'm going to put a link in the chat about that. She's the most amazing woman. She's pint-sized, and she stood up and she spoke about how when COVID hit, she realized the difficulty of climate change, and she single-handedly has mobilized the community, not only for improvement, but developing an emergency evacuation plan for the kinds of issues they're facing there on the West Coast. She's an amazing person. And I sat down next to her and I said, look, who are you? Like, how did you get people to do all these things? She said, I was a former headmistress. So I thought, okay, there you go. Second one, Felicity Strange from the Friends of the Florinflay. She's well into her 80s, and she is the most incredible activist fighting for the Florinflay on the West Coast. Mariette Lieferink, who has done a lot of work in the mining sector, is now moving into the water and sanitation. And then also you, Ferrial. So, sticking to your guns and laying the criminal charge against the city of Johannesburg for the pollution. So I just wanted to highlight these 4 examples, which I find very inspiring myself. Now, on this question of the use of court processes, I think as women, we need to ask ourselves, what is our power and what is our agency? And there is power and agency that comes from participation in court processes. But I think that at some level, because they take so long, and because we still have quite a masculine culture in the judiciary and in the advocacy, that it can be disabling for women. That it takes very long, especially in matters of pro bono, it takes very, very long for those papers to be finalized, matter to be brought to courts. And I think that those processes are important for a variety of reasons. They're important for social mobilization. They have a variety of other benefits that flow from them that is not necessarily linked to the outcome. But there are other ways in which women can be expressing their agency and actualizing their power in the world in a context which is also quite, if you think of engineering and technical, the water treatment works, it's also quite a masculinized sector. So I'm quite interested in exploring how we express our power with our children, in education, in schools, in businesses, and not necessarily always just turning to the courts.
Thank you for that. I think.
Can I add to that?
Yes, go ahead, Makoma.
Oh, okay. I think one other thing is that it's not that people want to go to court or women want to use the courts. It's because of the frustration that they are met with when they try to speak to authorities at any level. And at a local level, it's just worse. But in most areas, women are not taken seriously. So there's that power imbalance. And for women to be able to achieve what they want, they go to the extremes of going to court. It's not an instant instinct that you take either the municipality or court. It's a long process that people feel that we can no longer be doing this, talking, not be listened to, and raising issues of concern around regulations and not be listened to. And that's why women tend to go to court, and actually becomes so embarrassing for the institutions that women are taking them to court, because they had undermined them from the word go when they tried to speak to them and raise some concerns, and also at time coming up with solutions of what needs to be done. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that it's flowing so nicely. I mean, I think that those raise really good points about the court. And thank you, Tracy, for sharing your women as well. And politely adding me to them. I didn't say she has to, but yeah. I think that, that's an important thing, because you've discussed the whole thing of it's about the power imbalance. And that is why women are going to court. We also have a pretty defunct government at local level, or local government or provincial. And so this kind of forces a lot of activists to go to court to be heard. But I think what I've also heard being said is that this is the one part of fighting that imbalance that Makoma has talked about. So, and the reality is that we have such a diverse space in terms of civil society, etc. So how do we use this, or how do we work to mobilize so that, yes, court is a tactic, but in terms of building a movement, how do we build a more inclusive, diverse space within the environmental, climate, social justice movement arena, to ensure that, let's be honest, even in civil society, it's still very patriarchal. How do we change that, and not, and particularly from women from marginalized communities, but for women in general? And I think, given your responses, I think I had this for one person, but I think let's hear from everyone. How do we create a diverse space, and that takes into account gender, race, class, etc., and ensure that women from marginalized communities are heard and respected? I will start with Tsholofelo now.
Right, thanks, Ferrial. So yeah, with this one, power is central. When it comes to mobilizing and educating people within communities, whether it's women or the youth, we first need to unmask our power relations and acknowledge our power relations as a step towards inclusion, as a step towards collaboration. We need to firstly start removing ourselves from a position of power when we do go and do interventions within communities, and also try to be there to listen to the people in those spaces, to give them the platform to have a voice, to not only just be there to listen to what we have come there to say. Yeah, so I think our solution lies within walking the talk, so practicing inclusion. And it's also important to speak about gender justice, and to also help men understand that patriarchy also disadvantages them, although it does benefit them in particular ways, but it not only disadvantages women, but men as well. And yeah, that's what I'd like to say for now.
Thank you. That's great. I like the idea of unmasking power relations, because I think often when we're speaking to people, and often even in civil society, I mean, if you've ever tried to say, could you please check your privilege? Oh my word, it's like you're starting a war. So yes, I think people need to understand their power relations, their privilege of power, and not be afraid to actually, face it. Tracy-Lynn, over to you in terms of that.
This is a really difficult question, and I've got a lot of thoughts flowing into my head, and I'm not sure whether to bring some of them into the discussion, but I think women must also have courage and be brave. So we still live in a very patriarchal society, and it impacts at every single level. Even in my privileged space of a university, I've encountered a talking down to, a not listening to, an accommodation of my views. And I had a particular instance where I had to step up and just say, actually, no, but it wasn't easy. The starting point has to be that women are powerful. Women are powerful. They don't need to be pleasers, and they have agency not to be pleasers. But I just have these two very tragic stories in my mind about how women are absorbing the stress of our very, our dysfunctional social ecological systems. And the one is Lauren Dickinson in New Zealand. And there's both cases of women who've killed their children, which you can take as the most extreme stress that a woman can experience, to kill her own children because she feels she's not going to be there to protect them. So Lauren Dickinson migrates, she goes to New Zealand, and she kind of set aside her own career for her husband, who wasn't listening to her. When she said, I'm so stressed, I'm having these thoughts about killing my children. And amazingly, he didn't listen to her. And she's also the outcome of a particular end of the kind of violent system we have in South Africa. On the other hand, a woman in Butterworth, this was reported on in Daily Maverick, who killed her 3 children and hung herself because of a debt collector who had come to her house, and she hadn't told anyone about her problem. She'd set herself aside, she put herself last. So what is common between those two stories is women who put others' interests first, who don't speak up about their problems. And, then there's this overwhelm, and then they act out in the stress. So we have to own our power. We have to see what we actually have control over, and not always be the last one at the table. It's not a terrible thing to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. So that might be a bit of a muddled answer, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Those are powerful thoughts. I mean, I did see those articles, and I think that the way it also gets shared in the media is as if these women are completely, out of how could they do that? It's not looking at the deeper issues. And thank you for that, Tracy. It is a concerning state. And I do like that we have to own up and not always be the last one at the table. Yeah, thank you. Makoma, over to you.
Yes. Ferrial, you are trying to open a can of worms, but I think it's some of the discussions that we have not been having for quite a long time, and it's time that those discussions come up. One is that we all are bound by the disruptions that we find ourselves or we are challenged with. The right to water or clean drinking water, or the right to drinking, to access water as we need it. The right to energy also binds us. The right to breathe clean air. I mean, this is across genders, across races, and these are the issues that should be bringing us together. And if those issues are bringing us together, but we must also, when they bring us together, at the back of our mind, challenge the issues around class, because there are those that are in a luxurious position to be able to buy water or have electricity as much as they want, unlike those who don't have. So I think sometimes those who are in a luxurious position should be able to put themselves in the shoes of those who can't. But there's one thing that binds us together, the right to breathe clean air. This, no matter how much no matter how rich you are, you have to leave maybe the area that you are living in and go to another country or go to another place where there's clean air. So these are the issues that bring us together. And I think these issues bringing us together, they should be the kind of issues that would unite us as a people, and so that we can challenge these issues as a collective. But practically, I think there's a lot of things that we have to do so that we can bring ourselves together. I'll just make an example about Earthlife Africa, that because we became aware, or we are aware, that those who bear the brunt of climate change, of negative impacts of climate change, those who bear the brunt of energy inaccess, water inaccess, are women. And we took a conscious decision that the organization will be led by women, but particularly those women who are the ones who are feeling much more of the brunt. So the organization is a Black, female-led organization. And that doesn't come easy, because there's a lot of criticism that we endured when that theory of change, and we say we're putting this into practice. But we soldiered on, and here we are. And what's so important about that is that we are able to reach out to majority of citizens of this country, because they hear a person like them talking their language about the issues confronting them and saying, what sort of solutions can we bring together? So there's practical things. Maybe the example that I'm making, it's one of those examples, but language also becomes a barrier, and context also becomes a barrier. So it's quite important, if we want to bring about solutions, it's the people who are adverse or aware of the context, they have the language, and they also are saying, how do we bring up solutions rather than a top-down approach? It's a bottom-up approach where conversations are taking place, and those conversations are also intergenerational, in a sense that they include all forms of information, the current information, scientific, that we have, and the memory that people have, and also the kind of indigenous knowledge or ancient wisdoms that people have, and that it becomes the glue of what we can be able to do together. And I feel that the issues of race, class, and gender can also be approached in that kind of models. There's different ones, but we have chosen this one as an organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Makoma. I'm taking notes profusely here, because you're saying, all of you are saying such amazing, I think inspirational things that I think many of us need to hear. You know, you get bogged down in civil society and you can get quite stuck. We have 15 minutes. I want to ask, I have a few more questions, but I think that I want to also, I'm allowing, if you have a question from the audience, if you want to put forward your question, please do, because I want to allow other people to contribute as well. I think there are a few questions that I have, but the one that I want to ask is, I want to also bring in Tsholofelo here to talk about, are we doing enough? Because, Makoma, you've mentioned a lot of things in terms of practical things for change. And I think Tracy-Lynn also mentioned that in a technical side, looking at practical things that we can do. And I'm going to come up to that. So maybe in the meantime, think about that. What are the practical things we can do? But you've also mentioned about uniting under race, class, gender, etc. And I want to ask Tsholofelo, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but are we doing enough as activists, social justice, environment, to hand over the baton to the youth? And I think that is something I have for you specifically. So if you can come in on that one, please.
All right, thanks, Ferrial. So I believe that this depends on the context. I am lucky enough to be in a space that includes me, and a space that actively encourages me to take part in the work that we do. So I'll firstly speak about our environmental justice school. So one of our criteria is to ensure that we actively encourage women, especially young women, as well as the youth, to participate in the school, where we speak about a transformation to a just transition. Because without the youth, there won't be a just transition if the youth is only included once the big decisions are made, if their voices are not included in what the solutions are going to be for a just transition, then it won't happen, because by the time that those people who have pushed forward certain ideas, by the time that they are no longer living on this earth, we are the ones who will then have to bear the brunt of these decisions that were made without our consultation. So I think that within the civil society space, yes, the youth is included. We have people that are mentoring us, that are passing down knowledge and experiences, and also allow us to speak our minds. But as a society, I think we have a long way to go, because it's not enough to only give youth a seat at the table and expect them to keep quiet and to just be representation as like a tick box exercise to say, hey, we have youth in our group. But yeah, that's what I can say.
Thank you so much, Tsholo. I mean, I think you're raising really important things about not being able to, not just giving you a seat at the table, and how do we build that real involvement and engagement. But I think it is something for all of us to think about. Now, I know that, some of us think, it's water, what's the issues of, I think it's cross-cutting. And I think very early on, Tracy-Lynn said that it's not just an environmental issue. And that is why we've kind of just steered as the discussion has gone. I have 2 questions, I think, from the audience or comments. And after that, I have one more question that I think would allow you to sum up. There's a lot of very interesting comments coming up. So maybe if you can have a look at them on the thing. But I think one of the questions was from Annalette, and I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, but I do apologize, Annalette. How do we approach conservative pockets among ourselves? Do you want to explain that a little bit more? Can we give her access? You unmute. Yes, go ahead. And let you unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay, right. I've been approached. I'm a local activist in Tswane, and I am also a retired lecturer from UNISA, but I've been working with gardening and food security in the community, and in the Tswane community, in the inner city community. And what really struck me, because there are still leaders and women leaders who want, if the service work towards the women in shelters, for example, or women in NGOs, or vulnerable people in NGOs, who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of the service work of the NGOs. But if one takes on the leaders of the NGOs because there are issues, there are safety issues at the shelter, for example. Now, this happened to me just last night. I took it on with the leader of the NGO and with the coordinator of the program that there are safety issues at the one shelter where the house is falling apart and people come over the fences, male criminals, unfortunately, we have to say, come over the fences of the shelter for women, and they steal from the women. Now, I was outspoken because I was trying to deal with this group of people since about 2020 about these safety issues, and also the condition in which the women live in this house. And they refused to hear me, and the leaders refused to accept that I am here with a point-to-point practical issue of human rights. And they said to me, I am trying to take over the program. And the real issue is that is the kind of attitudes that one still find. How, as women, do we deal with this?
Thanks, Annalette. I think it links very nicely to Simone's question, which is, to our fantastic speakers, you are also brave and inspirational. How do you manage the fear that comes with fighting the man? Sometimes these fights can come at great personal cost. Maybe you can just, you can respond, but I want to also give you the last question so you can kind of summarize it all as your last response, is that, I think that what has already been said is that collaboration is key to driving change, and presently we have a very divided civil society. So what can we do as activists in the various organizations, because we're still very much stuck in the 80s of ideological differences? How do we build that so that we actually start building a movement that's much more than just the people we speak to? And the nice thing that I'm finding about today's webinar is that it's not speaking, usually we talk about environmental justice and we only deal with the environmental justice issues. And I think we forget that there are broader gender issues that we also need to deal with. So that's something that I think maybe if you can incorporate, and what can we do to make a contribution that's different to build this unity that we talk about. I will reverse the order. So I will give it to Tracy-Lynn, then Tsholofelo, and then Makoma, please.
Thank you, Ferrial. So I'm going to try and summarize everything in 3 points. It's a fallacy to think that as women, we're all the same. We're different. Even though we are, we have race and class and other kinds of differences. Some of us are mothers, some of us aren't, some of us are older, younger, and so on. We have different styles of engaging. Some of us are controllers, some of us are avoiders, some of us are pleasers. A lot of women are pleasers. But understanding that we have different styles of engagements and having to accept that, respect that, and accept that, and empathize. And if I could say one thing about our situation in South Africa, we have to get over our differences. We have to empathize with each other, see each other's position, and get a move on, and get some social cohesion and some respect for the common good. So that empathy is incredibly important. But it doesn't mean you don't have to sit with that in judgment. You don't have to get stuck with it. So this example of the shelter, you've raised your issue, you're not going to get any joy there. You've discerned that. Move along. Find the next point of action. Don't lose your concern, but take it to another level, because you're just going to get stuck there. That person has a different style of engagement. They've got different concerns. They've got different baggage. It's fine. Just move along. Simone's question of how do you then deal with the fear of taking things on, and in the one situation I had, which was a very difficult situation, and taking on a very powerful man, and it was very anxiety provoking and very time consuming and energy draining. But what spurred me on was the look in the eyes of a woman in the group that I was with, and her expectation that nothing was going to get done, and knowing that I wasn't going to disappoint her. And so when I could take that process forward, and in her eyes, I could see, yes, I've done the right thing, even if it would cost me, if I had to deal with that. So that's what motivated me, was like the respect of other women for doing the right thing. And then, sorry, the last question, Ferrial, was about how do we move forward? I think I've answered that. Empathy, respect, social cohesion. Those are my 3 watchwords.
Thank you. I really like that. I'll hand over to Tsholofelo.
Right. Thanks, Ferrial. Okay, I'd like to address, in a way, Annette's question about how do we deal with conservative ideas in our spaces. So I would say that firstly, we need to conscientize people so that they understand that the way that our society is a construct. So not everything is like this because it's naturally the way that things are supposed to be. So specifically power relations between men and women, and you will definitely get women who will continue to foster a kind of space that enables patriarchy to grow, and then become custodians of patriarchy in their spaces. But I think one thing that we can accept as activists is that changing people's mindsets, attitudinal challenges are at the crux of our work. And we do our best to try to plant seeds and grow these seeds of change in people that are willing to change. So that's where we focus our energy on. And then your question now, Ferrial, of how can we move forward? How can we build activism? I can say that we need to focus on our power within and our power with. That's what we say at the EJ school. So each and every one of us has a power within. And if we then embrace these expertise that we have, these experiences that we have, it will grow into a much more bigger, much more effective power with. So that's what I would like to say in closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tsholofelo. I love it. I think also about planting seeds. I think that's, yeah, I appreciate. We'll come back to that. Makoma, the last one, and then we will end. Please, I know we're running a little bit late, but please just bear with us. We shouldn't finish too late.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ferrial, and thanks, Tsholofelo, for those powerful words. I don't think we're fighting men. We're fighting for equality and upholding human rights. And this is where I come from. And one thing that I would say is we're responding to what's happening around us. And that's why we have courage to take up the issues. And courage, why? It's because you are concerned about a particular situation that it leads to human rights violations. And so for you to be able to correct that, and people say people have got courage, but I see that as fixing or correcting, what is not correct. And because I think we've just gotten used to taking the abnormal as normal. But I feel that we are normalizing the situation as it's supposed to be. And other people may say that it's courage. Yes, I agree. It's the absence of fear, but it's the absence of fear for you to be able to correct what it's not right, that it's impending on your life. I think what I would want also to say is that water is life. It's central to everything that we do on a daily basis. And water we use for hygienic purposes, we use it for cooking, we use it to keeping ourselves healthy, but also water is important and it's at the core, it's central to religious and spiritual practices. And this is why I think water is so important and it needs to be preserved.
Thank you so much. I think that I could have a much longer discussion with each of you with the wealth and depth of your information and knowledge and experience that I think, today's webinar, we could have talked about water. We could have talked about the science of water. We could have talked about a particular issue, whether it's a dam or whatever. But I think what we're trying to do is that in our water activism, as we move forward as WaterCAN, is to do what Tsholofelo said, is to plant the seeds of all other social justice issues that we need to link to. And I really think what you said also, everyone, I mean, there's so much notes here that I'm so excited. But you're right, Makoma, water is linked to everything. It's linked to education. Young women are not going to school because there's poor sanitation. There's health, there's education. We saw health during COVID. I mean, people didn't have water. How were they supposed to stay healthy? So there's all of those kind of things that I think is fundamental in terms of water. Water is not just an environmental issue. It's not something we should be taking for granted, but it's linked to our everyday lives and everything we do. I like the idea of having social cohesion and respect and empathy. I think we're losing that. Thank you for bringing that out again, Tracy-Lynn. I think that it is so important to have those as we move forward and to keep planting the seeds as activists as we move forward. And yes, I think another day we'll have to have a discussion on what a just transition means for women, in terms of climate change, in terms of water, in terms of environmental degradation, and as we move forward on that. So I think so much has been raised. I don't know where to start, but I think thank you so much for joining us today, for being part of this webinar. There's been a lot of very insightful comments that have come up on the side. I hope you saw that people are motivated by today. We don't always have to have a webinar where we unpack the problems of the world and then leave a webinar feeling heavy. So I hope people are feeling inspired. Thank you for joining us. The recording will be out and we'll email that to you. Please share that widely. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day today and keep the fire burning for our activism tomorrow as National Women's Day.